Today, I am here with the current chairman of the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, and the Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis, Dr. the Honorable Timothy Harris. Today we are here to discuss the situation that is presently taking place in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Prime Minister Harris has just returned from the United Nations, where he led a delegation to the United Nations in trying shuttle diplomacy to help the situation as it is presently in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Dr. Harris, welcome to this program.
Thank you very much for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Okay. Now, as the current chair of the Caribbean Community, you have been leading the regional bloc in diplomatic engagements over the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela's political crisis at the United Nations. Who all did you meet with, and why were these countries or groupings selected for meetings with CARICOM on the Venezuela issue, and how have these engagements been going?
Thank you very much. I led a CARICOM delegation to the UN, and that decision emanated from an emergency meeting of CARICOM heads, which took place last weekend, last Friday, to be exact. And out of that, one of the ways forward was for the CARICOM to engage the international community. United Nations comes necessarily to the fore because it is the foremost international organization, the only international body with a grouping of 196 thereabout member states. So you can't get any more vast in terms of reach. We determined that it was important in the context of the very volatile situation in Venezuela that we reach as many as possible and as quickly as possible, and further that we will invite the involvement of the Secretary General of the United Nations. We were able on Monday morning to have fulfilled that particular mandate as it relates to the meeting with the UN Secretary General. He promptly agreed to meet us. At the time when we made the overtures, he was somewhere in Switzerland. And so he got back on that very weekend, and it is a mark of the importance and urgency that he attached to the invitation to meet with us, that he would so quickly free his calendar to allow for this session. I would say that meeting went very well. We were able to get his views regarding this matter. We were able to be apprised of other engagement and other outreaches that had been made by him and to get a sense of his willingness to intercede. And he accepted, importantly, our invitation for his good offices to be made available to the people of Venezuela. And so we felt very positive about that. Of course, the good offices and its mission would only succeed to the extent that the contending party were appreciative of the role that such a good office can play, and therefore would welcome it. And we were able, based on previous dialogue that we had had with the President of Venezuela, whilst we were in Guyana, to indicate to him that we were advised that at least one of the principal actors in terms of the presidency was willing to be engaged. So that, for me, was a major and for us a development. Importantly, once we were there, we engaged a number of other countries and groupings, as you said. We were able to meet with the representatives of the African Union. That union represents some 55 5 or thereabout member states. So that is a huge gathering of member states from the African continent. We were able to meet with the distinguished representative of the EU, and the EU represents another 28. So through those two agencies and secretariats, we would reach some 83 member states in terms of sharing our views and perspectives on that matter. Beyond that, several other countries were either invited by our delegation or in fact took advantage of our presence there to indicate a willingness to meet. Among them would be Canada, among them was Uruguay, among them Cuba, and several other countries in fact came, Brazil, and we had an audience with those other countries and entities. It was a very intensive and hectic schedule, going back-to-back meeting after meeting, starting in the morning. Our program would have started around 9 each day and continued. We had anticipated that by Monday we would have been finished with our mission. As a result of requests by other countries to come to here to talk with us, we extended it to Tuesday, when we would have met South Africa and several other countries and had some very interesting discussions with them. So from the point of view of the engagement, the diplomatic initiative, I would say we accomplished much more than we had bargained for. We met with the Secretary General, we met also with the President of the General Assembly, and Her Excellency was very delighted that we had chosen to come, and she indicated how much she valued the intervention of the Caribbean leadership with respect to this matter. Ultimately, the question of whether or not a country is seated and represented at United Nations, that resides with the General Assembly, and so it was important that we should meet with the President. The discussions have always been candid, and in the context of the Caribbean community, one has to appreciate that we are the region closest to Venezuela. Venezuela, in fact, share borders with a number of member states, including Guyana, including Belize. And so as a consequence of that, it means that one could just walk over, as if you were going from Cayenne to Keys, because they share common border at certain parts. Indeed, it was interesting to hear the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Keith Rowley, indicated that from one point, Venezuela is just 3 miles from Trinidad and Tobago from one end, and 7 miles. So Trinidad too is very close to Venezuela. In the context of that, that simply means that we will be impacted most by whatever happens in Venezuela. And so our position, as is the position that all small island states should take, is that we must pursue peace at all costs in Venezuela. Because the opposite of that, war, bloodshed, military intervention, will not redound to the benefit of the people of the region. Already, even before there are military clashes, Trinidad reports that it has over 40,000 immigrants that have come across its borders into its country, which is, it has no choice but to provide humanitarian and other support. 40,000 people. That is a significant proportion of the population of St. Kitts and Nevis that has already moved. And that is what that kind of porosity of border would do to any country in terms of movement. So you would have the issues of inflows and how you deal with them. You will have the issues of the pressure upon social services, your health, your education, and those pressures would be made worse through the fact that we have a deficit in bilingualism. And so you're bringing persons whose first language is Spanish, and they are going to be superimposed upon a system where services are being delivered in English. We have the additional problem of the fact that, by and large, with the porosity of the borders comes the vulnerability to arms. And what we are hearing from some member states is that they have experienced an increase in the trafficking of small arms and not so small arms. So let's say arms and ammunition as a consequence of the destabilization of Venezuela. It therefore means that the region as a whole has to be more alert. Or whatever gets into Trinidad and Tobago can reach any other member states. And that has been part of our challenge with law and order. We have a significant significant culture of gang warfare in the country that is being assisted by the use of illegal weapons and arms in the country. We are not a producer, so it means they are coming in. And what we are hearing is that people are now bartering in the guns in Trinidad for basic things like food and clothing and so on. So that then sets up a very dangerous situation. But even if these things were not rife at this particular juncture, we could see no benefit at all from war, from military aggression in Venezuela for the region as a whole. If you have an outbreak of military aggression and warfare, you're going to send the wrong signal for the tourism product and the tourism services which all of us offer. That is always known to be fragile, though a resilient industry. But then the peace, which is a critical underpinning of what we sell, along with our beaches, our sands, our warmness and openness, all of that then becomes disturbed when you have within your region that challenge of military aggression and war. So the short point, we are in this really for the people of Venezuela to have a better deal and a better arrangement and a better quality of life than one that will come as a consequence of war.
Yes.
We look at regions elsewhere, whether it is Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, anywhere there has been war. And until now, people are still attempting to put their lives together. So war does not bring any benefit to those on which it is imposed. We have the situation in the Middle East, the Palestinian people, and so on and so on. Their situation as a result of constant war has not improved over time. So we have that challenge, and so we have a vested interest in the peace and stability of Venezuela, and by extension, in our own region. Sure. And that is what the mission was about. I believe we were able to get that message through. The fact that the Secretary General accepted the invitation to use his good office, the fact that the President of the General Assembly warmly received us and commended us for our engagement, speaks well to the respectability and the regard that people have. It was interesting as we were doing one of our debriefing sessions. It was our permanent rep, His Excellency Sam Kanda, who made the point. As the permanent representative for Barbados was speaking, she said, Prime Ministers, before you go, I have to say this. I have been involved, speaking of herself, Elizabeth Thompson, I think is her name. I have been involved in politics for 40 years. I've seen prime ministers come and go. And she reported she woke up 3 a.m. in the morning, was reflecting on what we had accomplished the Monday. And she said, tears came from her eyes. He said, why? She said, you all did us so proud yesterday that for her, it was a proud moment for all the people of the Caribbean, because she saw us, as it were, took on delegations more powerful than us in terms of economic wealth and positioning and so on. And we were able to articulate our position in ways that none could render ineffective. And for her, that was an amazing response. Our own Ambassador Sam Kanda said, after she had finished, that listen, what is remarkable about this is that it is the smallest region in the world. That is what the CARICOM community represents. 15 countries with a population, if you include Montserrat as an associated state, which is just a handful, to Jamaica with the highest population, just over 2 million. The smallest country in the world was leading on an international matter of significant consequence to world peace and the reordering of political relations. Because look at some of the protagonists, the United States, China, and Russia, and you name them. And that is where the world is at. And who it is leading the smallest region. And at this time, we are lucky, or history would have it, to use some words, that it is the smallest country in the region that is steering at this particular moment in time. And so that is what we are attempting to do, really.
Now, CARICOM believes in free and fair elections as a matter of democracy. However, the concern in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela is that the elections were not free and fair, and that there's a call for fresh elections. Maduro has so far refused. What is CARICOM's view on this?
Well, CARICOM's view on it is basically that an election may have issues, and indeed point to any perfect election. Point to some of the countries that are talking about elections and look at what is being said about them and their elections. So if the elections have been problematic, the question is, how do you resolve them? And that is what the dialogue must be about. That is why we are saying, let us get the contending parties in Venezuela together. Let them put their checklist of issues, let them go through them, and let them negotiate their way to a resolution of these. It is not new in our Caribbean region that we have had disputed elections. And always we have found a peaceful way to resolve them. In St. Kitts and Nevis in '93, we had our own disputes regarding the fairness and validity of the election. We had our own disputes regarding the legitimacy of the government to govern. And in the end, it was the chamber, it was the Christian Council, and all groups brought contending parties together at Four Seasons, came up with the Four Seasons Accord. And what was determined? That in an 18-month period of time, St. Kitts and Nevis should go back to the people in fresh general elections. So we are not taking side in Venezuela, and we frankly can't be the arbiters of whether the elections were free and fair. From what we know is that you had contending parties, and the outcome was proclaimed since May. Some persons didn't participate. Could a man who didn't play in the end make a contention that he should be when he did not participate? And even then we look to our history. It was refreshing to hear one of the Prime Minister recall, but this is not the first time that we have had in the Caribbean region where a party refused to participate in an election and then it can cry foul. In Jamaica in 1984, we were reminded that Siaga called an election. The Manly Party, PNP, I think it was then, said, listen, we are not satisfied with these arrangements. This election can't be a fair one. They boycotted the election. The government went on because what was in the balance? Well, you did not participate, you opted out. So if that were the situation, you will have a dangerous precedent that the party that doesn't participate only have to cry foul thereafter, and then we have a situation like that. I heard the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago advise us and advise some of the groups with which we met. Well, we understand what happens when elections are considered illegitimate. We understand what happens when parties opt out of participating. And he reminded that in 1971, Trinidad had its third. In 1971, Trinidad went through what he described as elections, and some parties refused to participate. It led the government to return with all seats in that election in the early 70s. And he was making the point, but we have enough experience about these things not to let the development of those issues be a situation for civil war, because we have the rich history and the practice. And few other countries have had this ability to deal with the surprises, if you will, of democratic outcomes as we in the region. From overthrow in Grenada in 1983 or thereabout, we have had to deal with this, to situations in St. Lucia when Compton received a particular outcome, 1 by 1 seat. Compton called an election maybe in 5 days, said he will not work with that. We have had situations where the democracy was threatened under Eugenia Charles. And all those instances, we always dealt with them through peaceful dialogue by contending parties coming to the table, knowing their limits, and come up with an arrangement that preserves the peace and prosperity of their country. And that is all that we are asking for Venezuela. So to be clear, it's not that we are saying that this one is and this one not. That is a decision for the people of Venezuela. What we are saying, let us create the environment in which all that is good could come out of that environment, and let the people, not external parties like us or any other body, determine what it is the people of Venezuela genuinely want. And let us use long-established principles and practices to assist them in getting where they determine is in their best interest to go.
Now, Venezuela, Prime Minister, has been a friend to many CARICOM member states, especially with its socioeconomic programs that have assisted member states of CARICOM. The most outstanding one is the Petro-Caribe Agreement. With the present crisis, what are some of the concerns about the continuation of these programs? And additionally, the US has placed further sanctions on Venezuela, recently on its state-owned petroleum industry. How do you think this will affect the socioeconomic situation in the oil-rich Latin American country?
Well, starting with the last point, really, anything that denies access to participation in international trade, international marketplace, will worsen the living conditions, particularly of ordinary people. Because every country, especially one like Venezuela and those within the Caribbean, depend on imports for most of what they eat, drink, and wear. And so when you have restrictions on trade and on the major source of foreign currency for that country, that will not be good news for the ordinary folks in the country, because they will suffer most. Those who have resources will always find ways around. Those who have little are dependent upon these kinds of open sources for them to be able to get involved in legitimate business. As to what the future holds with respect to the arrangements, we don't know yet, and it could be anyone's guess. We'll have to wait to see what happens, what role, what will be the position either of a continuing administration or a new one. So those are things yet unknown to us. We can think about them and of their consequences, but we won't know for sure until, as it were, the dust is settled or some clarity is brought to what the near and medium-term future for the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela will be. And we, as a region, will keep that under advisement and study. And it shows another reason again, because some may ask, well, why this region? Why are governments engaged? We have to be engaged because the consequences which I've outlined for security, for our economy in terms of our tourism, for our energy security, all these things now are conversations that we have to have and studies about which we have to contemplate in terms of our future. And because we are so close, our neighbor's house on fire, we have to be mindful that we take the necessary safeguard to preserve international principles. And we have done so. You listen to the debate at the Security Council, you'd identify a number of other countries that were going by principles. And that is what we are doing. We have articulated in each meeting the principles. And that is what we are standing by. So it's not that we have, as it were, a horse in the race in Venezuela. The principles which come ready to the mind is one, non-interference in the states and non-intervention. And these are well documented in the UN Charter, United Nations Charter. We support the principle of rule of law, of democracy, constitutional order, and the right to self-determination. All of these are well enshrined in the United Nations Charter. And that is why we went there, because it was as a result of these charter principles being enshrined and lived by that we have been able since 1945 to preserve relative peace. It has not been perfect peace because we speak to what have happened in Iran, Afghanistan, and so on. But we have been able to preserve peace in so many parts of the world and provide a framework which guides member states in terms of their policy and in terms of their ability to deal with aggression against their states. Even if we go to the OAS Charter, I think it's Article 2 or one of them, speaks to the inviolability of the territorial integrity of states. And those are things that have guided us. They have guided us, for example, in disputes between Guyana and any of its contending neighbor. They have guided us in terms of our positions we have taken in South Africa. When there was apartheid, the right to self-determination became a critical issue. The right to self-determination of the largest grouping within the society. So those are the principles that for over time have kept the CARICOM region to be able to speak consistently to people with power and people in position from a point of view that makes sense and which ricochets because it's undergirded by age-old principles.
Now, you spoke before about Venezuelans, of course, leaving Venezuela and going to other countries within the region. Some of these countries are CARICOM countries. For example, Trinidad, which borders Venezuela. There is about 200...
Guyana as well. Guyana also. Yes. Even here we have observed certain increases, not at the same magnitude elsewhere. So all of us in the end would be impacted.
There is about 200,000 or thereabout Venezuelans living in Trinidad.
Yes.
And they must be making some contribution. At the very same time, the country has to be concerned as well in terms of, it's a large number. However, they protested in Trinidad against the Maduro government. We have Venezuelans here too. And as small as a country we are, there was also protest against Maduro outside the Venezuelan embassy. Now, it seems that there is a growing disaffection towards the Maduro government. And that is perhaps fueling, with the opposition leader, of course, some of what is taking place in Guyana. Now, Maduro, of course, has said that he's willing to meet. However, he has refused to say that he wants fresh elections. Now, St. Kitts and Nevis is a member of CARICOM. What is our position in terms of what is happening in Venezuela?
Well, our position is exactly articulated in the CARICOM release that was issued, I think, last week, Friday, and we haven't changed. We have attempted to spell out again principles, because that is what guide the action. And once we have these principles right, everything else would follow. We are not, as I said, making judgment and advocating for or against in Venezuela. That is why we said, let the platform for dialogue be put in place so that the Venezuelans themselves make a determination of what their present and future will be. If we support the processes and the structures that allow them to reach there, we will be happy, because ultimately it must be the choice of the people that is reflected in democratic outcomes. And you want people to make that from an informed basis. You're having movements of people from Venezuela, and yes, and we expect that those movements will increase so long as there is a chorus that reflects a threat of war, because people would prefer peace, and those who can will go. Some have opted to leave, but Venezuela has a population of 30-something million. So even if we assume that 2 or 5 gone, it means that 25, 27 million people determine that they want to be there, and they will stay there, whatever the reasons, and there will be a multiplicity of reasons. So it is important that when we look not at just the exit, but those who have maintained their standing there, saying, this is where we want to continue, for whatever the reason, to, as it were, continue to live. And what that says, the arithmetic of the election, does everyone who move is somebody with a grouse at the government? We can't say so, because people are moving for a multiplicity of reasons. We have heard numbers about movement, I think, into Colombia. And then we were told that in another era, Colombia had a sort of military kind of dictatorship operating, and some 4 million people fled to Venezuela. So until we do the disaggregation, who knows whether these are people now in this circumstance where they have determined that Venezuela is no longer what they wanted it to be, have determined that they will go back home, now that Colombia also is not what it was when they would have exited. So these are things why, what does the movement mean? We don't know, but we could accept the fact that people are moving. and people are moving out of concern for their circumstances, which would be a rational thing to do. When a country is under threat or under war, those who can will certainly find ways of movement. What we want, though, is to bring calm to that situation so that this kind of irregular, if you will, movement does not get to a stage where it becomes destabilizing to other member states, whether it is Colombia or Trinidad or any other country. And for that to happen then, we really need to pursue peace in Venezuela, because that is the only way you're going in the short and medium term to be able to contain this mass exodus to which you have referred, or this large exodus of persons going in different directions, seeking for alternatives.
Pope John Paul II once said that there can be no peace without justice. And as long as there is perceived injustice in that Latin American country, peace will not reign. CARICOM's position of not taking sides, do you think it can be seen that in not taking sides, people are thinking CARICOM is taking a side?
Well,
because of
yes,
the arrangements or the benefits to member states of Petrocaribe and other social programs?
Well, such a position, as I said from the beginning, one can deduce would have no bearing, because the position that we are taking now is one of principle. Just as when we engage in the matter of apartheid in South Africa, it was from the vantage point of principle. And that is why it is important that we are articulating the sacred principles that have undergirded our action and intervention. And that is why it's also very important that we do not be seen to be taken aside, because we want to be honest brokers in a dispute. And you can't go into a dispute where your views for or against a particular party is already known, because then you have the question of trust. That is why CARICOM has to deal with the principles rather than taking sides. Once we get the principles right, in our view, things would flow naturally, because those who have already taken sides would have the question of credibility. Could they now honestly intervene when their position or their particular bias is already so well known? And that is a part of it. When we had the trials in Haiti, it was the fact that CARICOM, to some extent, had some credibility, because, again, we moved from principles. We didn't go out and say that we were for this or against this, but we said this is a process that would lead. To get justice, we need a process to get there. And if we agree on those critical elements of the processes that would lead to justice, that would lead to the resuscitating of democratic life if there is a deficit, then we will get there.
Do you think
and so we are contending, whatever the outcome, from transparent processes based on principle, CARICOM will give support with respect to those matters.
Do you think that sometimes the processes are too long? Do you think that CARICOM's diplomacy will work? Do you think that the United Nations diplomacy will work? We have had examples of the United Nations, of course, as a body, over 190 countries. We've had genocide in Rwanda. The UN was there.
Yes.
The other countries were there. I'm asking, is CARICOM's diplomacy working?
It is working. The fact that over the last couple of days we have been able at short notice to mobilize an entire international, or the most important international organization, to listen to us, to engage us, tells us that it is working. Because that is the first point. You have to engage. We can't engage in a series of monologues. We have to have another party with whom we can engage. And we engage the Secretary General, we engage the President of the General Assembly. The two most important personalities in the organization were engaged. But look at some of the other parties with whom we engage. Mexico and Brazil and Cuba and all those, the African Union, that is 55 countries your message went to. South Africa, well, that is part of that group, but we met with the group and we met with other member states with respect to that. The European Union got a perspective. We met with Australia. And the fact that all these countries came to meet with us indicate that there's a value in the dialogue. And they are, like we all are, trying to find consensus on the way forward. Does diplomacy take long? Of course, but so does war. So you have to make up your mind. It's either we will sit and talk it through and have the patience and perseverance to stick to it to get there, or we'll go to war. And we see from Iraq, from Afghanistan, all these wars are going on long. So if you were to put your bet on war, put your bet on peace and dialogue, where will you go? It could only be peace and dialogue. Because the wars take long. You understand? And peace also takes time. But which does or brings the greatest benefit to mankind? Ultimately is peace. Ultimately is peace. That is what we want. Because only peace provides the framework in which we can go about our lives in a constructive way. And if we look, for example, at all the initiatives in the Middle East, there is no easy win when there are difficult problems, and some of the problems are intractable. So you at least get a cooling down period. You at least get time for people to get down from their high horses and determine that we have to have a conversation. And the basis of that will come through negotiation. It took a while in St. Kitts and Nevis in 1993 before we could get to the Four Seasons Accord. But did it pay dividend? Yes, because it brought an end to the bottle and stone and a lot of the other things that were inhibiting the return to normal life. But you have to invest in it for it to happen. And that is what we're doing. And that is what diploma is about. Investing time to reach rational minds in coming up with a solution. And we have to have this stick-to-it-ness to be able to carry it to the end. And that is why we have to be honest brokers. And that is why very early, if we are able to articulate the principles as eloquently as we have been able to do, we set the frame right. Nobody could argue the dual peoples can still choose to. But when you say, are you for interference in the state of another country? That is a sensible position. And it is especially important to protect small island states. For when the United Nations speaks to the territorial integrity, whose territory most need to be protected? Vulnerable small island states. Who needs democracy most? Small island states. And that is what who need a constitutional order. The UK, we are told, worked for years without a constitution. But we needed one, and we have one. So those are the principles we are trying to get right, rather than to upfront go and say, we're supporting this, we're supporting that. And then somebody say, but I can't come to the table with you because you already said what your biases are. And that is why we have taken this stand. As a region, of course, there are some member states that have gone further out than the regional consensus as sent out through the press statement, which is what we want to become the script of the region. But that is where we are working on. And I think we are on the right path. We have gotten traction. Persons have called, persons are talking, people are engaging. When we met with some of the ambassadors, We met with Mexico. The foreign minister came involved in line. Right at the UN, we were able to make outreach to the president of Venezuela.
Does CARICOM have any message for some of the countries in the EU, France, Spain, Germany, who have called for fresh elections in Venezuela, and the US, who have sided with Juan Guaido?
Well, our message is to go back to the UN Charter, read the document, evaluate your position now for consistency with this document, because this is the most important document which deals with all of international diplomacy. In the end, the framework for engagement between member states has been well established way back since 1945. And if member states were to go there, they will find the appropriate guidance. And that is why you find that positions are shifting, because as people attempt to reconcile and hard questions are being asked, what are the principles? When somebody say, I give you an ultimatum, how you will work that ultimatum? So you see then people move back from original ultimatum. And it tells you then that these positions couldn't be as well thought out. But when you have your position undergirded by the principles like we have, then you're in a better position. We want to keep the principles. Basti High School used to say principles, not men.
Principia non homines.
All right. So once we get the principles, all of the things will work out well for us.
Okay. One last question, Prime Minister Harris. What is CARICOM's hope for the government and people of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela?
Our hope, of course, is that the people of Venezuela will enjoy lasting peace. And those who have been suffering and those who have become displaced as Venezuela become a vortex, as it were, for international efforts now, that is bringing the country on a brink, that the people, especially the young children, they will not have scarred memories of an order that went bad for them in their country. For the elderly, our concern is still about they being able to get health care, to get their food, and to get access to all those things that we consider to be necessary for a good quality of life. So we have a hopeful view for the people of Venezuela. Same peace that we are enjoying, that they will be able to enjoy that peace. The same ability to participate in the international marketplace, we want them to have that. The same challenges that we ask our people to brace themselves, to take advantage, circumvent challenges, and seize opportunities to ensure the continuing growth and development, those same aspirations we want for the people of Venezuela. But importantly, they have to want them for themselves. That is why it goes back again to us being honest brokers, us being facilitators, and let them get the chance, the opportunity to make these decisions. It wouldn't be the first time that the world had been faced with difficult circumstances. And we have to, some people say the time for talk is over. It is never too late to talk. Never too late to talk. Up to the last hour, the dying man can reach for salvation. Up to the last moment. And if there is a moment, an opportunity for peace, the CARICOM message, pursue it. Because at the end of the day, we will all be better for it. The efforts of reconstruction after war, history has shown, have been a terrible plight for most of humanity. The lived experience of people in Iraq and all those other places in Latin America has shown again, it may take time, but it is worth it to pursue peace and stability. And so that is what we are after with our diplomatic initiatives so far.
Prime Minister Harris and Chairman of CARICOM, I want to thank you so much for offering to give this interview, and we continue to keep the government and people of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela in our thoughts and in our prayers.
Well, thank you very much. Deeply appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.